Social movements have taken place since the beginning of history. Currently, the United States is in the midst of several social movements, but I would like to take a chance to examine one in particular. That movement is the hashtag Black Lives Matter movement. To provide a little background, Black America in particular was in distress. They were completely distraught when they found out about the death of Trayvon Martin. Anyone who lived through it can express such. Trayvon Martin was stalked and murdered by a vigilante civilian at that, and he wasn't doing anything wrong except existing while being black. Naturally, black Americans identified Trayvon and his mourning family in a resounding way. Cries for justice were mounting around the country, and by March 23rd, Barack Obama himself, the first black United States president, stood in the Rose Gardens and said a sentence that resounded with Americans in a simple yet horrifying way, as it haunted our minds alike. He said, "If I had a son, he'd look like just like Trayvon." The impact of the death of Trayvon Martin remained with his mourners to the extent that an entire year later they were still watching and still waiting for justice. No one could bring this young man back to his family, but at least the American justice system would prevail. Trayvon would receive justice, and that his killer would be condemned for what he did, um, except he wasn't. The verdict was handed down, and the man who shot and killed a young 17-year-old boy trying to make it home that night was acquitted of murder, acquitted of manslaughter, and was free to return home and continue on with his life and family, even though Trayvon could not. This was not justice in the eyes of the black community, because it's not. We had grown way too familiar with the senseless loss of life given similar circumstance, and we turned to social media that night, sharing our sentiments with similarly disenfranchised around the nation. So one such user was Alicia Garza. That evening of July 2013, she was across the country at a bar in Oakland, California with her husband when she heard of the disturbing news. Later, in a self-described interview with Jamila King, she said she felt a multitude of emotions. She found herself processing such disturbing news amongst the people on her Facebook timeline, like many others that night. It was on this night that she also felt that America needed a reminder that Black Lives Matter, a fact which seemed so often forgotten. She confiscated the faces, the spaces, and she prefixed it with a hashtag. Um, she put it at the tail of a post that she later came to call her love letter to Black people, and that was only the beginning. Garza then decked the walls of her friends and her family with the hashtag in hopes to comfort them. One user in particular, Patrice Colors, she was an activist friend of Garza's, and within 24 hours, she had a proposition for Garza. Um, in fitting, she replied on her own Facebook wall, "Hey, how about a Black Lives Matter campaign?" After the initial proposition, Alicia Garza and Patrice Colors brought on Opal Tometi. The three of them then embarked on an effort that would bring Black Lives Matter into the national spotlight. The campaign they introduced that fateful night would go on to become the Black Lives Matter movement, which is a grassroots organization effort that is still very much active to this day, 5 years later after its conception. Now, this movement differs from its predecessors considerably, perhaps most notably in that its leadership is ambiguous and most definitely decentralized. Whereas Lyndon B. Johnson would call on Martin Luther King and the SCLC, Barack Obama had to call on some of the most visible leaders at the time because there was no one leader. The grassroots nature of the movement is also one of its key qualities. It's a dispersed collective, and structuring it in this way makes it for it to be easily adopted, as its members can work on multiple different fronts of an issue and then still come together when necessary. Aside from the structure of the movement, it is uniquely effective in that it is inclusive. Um, Looking back throughout social movements of the past, women took on large roles and received more remembrance from it. In other instances, much of the rhetoric was exclusive to men. However, Black Lives Matter is exclusive to no one. It considers all Black people of all socioeconomic and political identification. If you identify as Black, the movement is applicable to you, whether you live in Memphis, whether you live in London, across all spectrums of gender, sexuality, age, and economic statuses. Black Lives Matter is supported. This is important because it allows for just about anyone to take up the cause, and it allows for the movement to be expanded beyond just the United States, which again it has. In addition to the inclusivity of Black Lives Matter, it also allows for wide reaching applications. though it is chiefly associated with police brutality as it generally surrounds the unarmed black men who lose their lives for simply being black and threatening. Black Lives Matter can technically attack most anything that disenfranchises black lives. Therefore, when education systems leave our black children behind, or when they facilitate their relationships with criminal institutions, Black Lives Matter still applies. It matters when black people don't have access to fresh fruit and fresh produce. And it also matters when black people are not allotted the same quality of care by hospitals and physicians. I could go on about these disparities faced by African Americans, but the sentiment is the same in that Black Lives Matter through any aspect and any lens. Lastly, though the movement has remained decentralized and by some definitions lacking in terms of leadership, its founders have been continuously communicative of their beliefs and ideals for the organization. Alicia Garza described what she calls her story of the movement, wherein she explains the intentions of Black Lives Matter and denounces those who co-opt the movement without recognizing where it comes from. Now that we've discussed the strengths of the movement in relation to its success, let us examine it from a sociological perspective. The value-added theory of collective behavior was developed by Neil Smelser in 1962. This theory states that 6 preconditions must exist for collective behavior to occur, for in reality, Smelser argued that collective behavior was not actually all that spontaneous. The 6 conditions that Smelser outlined were: number 1, structural conduciveness. The environment had to be structured in such a way to allow collective behavior to occur. Then there's number 2, which is structural strain, as in, or that as collective behavior is a problem-solving behavior, the environment must also have some sort of problem that plagues it to address, to problem solve. Number 3 is generalized behavior, which is basically a belief that points to a specific problem and also a specific solution. So what can be done, and this is shared amongst the participants. And then there's the precipitating factor, also known as the triggering event. This will set off or trigger the collective behavior. Essentially, it's the match that lights the fire. Number 5 is the mobilization for action. This is the inspiration to act often provided by charismatic leaders or leadership. Think of Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, Adolf Hitler. They all lead in these collective behavior episodes. And it can also be something more simple, such as the media. And finally, number 6, the last precondition outlined by Smelser is the operation of social control. This is actually almost quite the opposite, as it's the breakdown of social control. The social controls are no longer present that allow for this collective behavior to occur. Now, to apply this to Black Lives Matter, let's look at it like this. So, number 1, structural conduciveness. We want to look at the primary development of Black Lives Matter. In America, mechanisms do exist, such as freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, and these allow for movements to occur in that you won't be punished for these things that need to happen for movements to occur. But also, America is a highly developed society. There's an ease of access to media and communications, a media that's also free to speak. This is important when you think about the fact that Black Lives Matter was started on the internet, per se. If no one had access to the internet, then it probably wouldn't have caught on to very many, if you can see where I'm going with that. Number 2, the relationships that Black people have with America is uniquely strained in the 400 years of history of prejudice and discrimination which this relationship sits upon. A lot of people struggle with this aspect when you look at Black Lives Matter because they look at the fact that it started in 2013. 2013 was the first year of the second term of a Black president. Nonetheless, the election of Barack Obama and his re-election have really nothing to do with that. And the fact that you think it solves this 400-year history, that is actually speaking to the larger problem at hand, which is some of the problems that Black Lives Matter is actually trying to address. So as for number 3, the generalized belief, the Black community has identified inequality and passed down its ideals for generations. From sitting around the dinner table and talking about BWB, which is striving while Black, to the media that's been produced through the 70s, 80s, 90s up till today, even after the Civil Rights Movement. You look at groups such as NWA, and you look at sitcoms such as Good Times, and you see these inequalities that Black people feel present in the system today. They're obviously present in the minds of African Americans. The 4th precondition was probably already ascertained earlier in this discussion, but obviously this would be the verdict in the case of the death of Trayvon Martin. I gave you a little outline, but the facts of Trayvon Martin case, he went to get a snack for him and his stepbrother. He went home and he didn't make it. Um, this is alarming, but what was most alarming about this case was the local police weren't really willing to do anything. It was Trayvon's family that had to work to get some sort of action to take place. It was actually with this work that they did. They reached out locally. The story got picked up by a college student who started a change.org petition, which is what later went around and caught hundreds of thousands of signatures. That's what brought it into the national spotlight. So this is why Trayvon's case specifically caught on. He wasn't doing anything. He was his only crime was being black, and then you have this family that worked so hard to put his name out there so that he wouldn't be forgotten, so that some justice would be had. And then in the end, justice was not had. Now, step 5 is a little tricky as Black Lives Matter is a decentralized movement, so there is no charismatic leader behind the movement. The three women who started this movement do not wish to take on that role, nor did they ever wish to take on this role. However, the unity that the cause inspires is leadership in itself. Um, Out of it, we see people such as Colin Kaepernick, Jesse Williams, and Shaun King, amongst many others. But these people turn and they use their platforms to speak the movement and advance the movement. And this in turn inspires participation, inspires awareness. Lastly, in the breaking down of social controls, you look at the Black Lives Matter movement, and unlike other instances of collective behavior, such as the Rodney King riots, where social controls such as law enforcement were absent, I feel this condition is mostly met in the sense that Black Americans have lost faith in their social controls. There's a general aura of distrust around the government, around police, around all these social controls, and with them being redefined, they can no longer control. And that's what allows for this collective behavior to occur. They've simply been redefined. So, in conclusion, the Black Lives Matter movement is changing the shape of social movements. The hashtag #MeToo movement, for instance, notably follows in the footsteps of Black Lives Matter. It started online, it has no formal organization or structure. I would say, however, that it's not as far reaching as Black Lives Matter at the moment, but it is only in its beginnings, and nor has it made as much of an impact quite yet. But the point is, in today's society, the ideals of human and civil rights are at their peak in definitiveness. Um, Equality, respect, political correctness, we kind of hold these values high, and thus we hold society to higher expectations today. And so that's why we see so many movements taking place in the present, and that's why I think that the Black Lives Matter movement is so special and so unique because it speaks to this particularly.